Hello, this is Judy Bartkowiak, NLP and EFT Kids. I thought I'd read to you today actually from my book Confidence for Kids: How to Boost Your Child's Confidence. And it's from chapter 4, Communicate in Their Language. And it's all about the NLP meta programs. And like a lot of NLP, it has some sort of quite a lot of jargon which can put people off. And one of the things I try to do is to communicate the basics, the basic principles, and explain to you why they matter when you're talking to your child or indeed your teen. So, what I'm going to explain hopefully will make sense, and I'm hoping there might actually be the odd aha moment as you think, right, so that's why that happens. I know when I trained with Sue Knight many moons ago, I had a lot of aha moments, and my poor kids sort of probably didn't know what hit them because I was sort of NLPing them left, right, and centre. Until, in fact, they were at that stage where it's like, don't NLP me, mum. Anyway, here goes. As well as children having a preference for visual, auditory, and kinesthetic, which you'll have heard about at school, I'm sure, they also have what we call meta programs, which define how they process their world. And these are concept versus detail, choices versus process, towards versus away from, internal versus external, and match versus mismatch. There are others. Those are sort of the ones I think are most relevant. Now, these tend to be sort of, if you think of it like a continuum, and I'll explain that as I go through. So it's not a sort of binary thing, this or that. It's where along that continuum your child sits in terms of how they like to process their world. So let's start with concept versus detail. Some children like to work in concepts with big general ideas, and others like the detail and small bite sized pieces of information. So, if your child likes detail, for example, they can feel overwhelmed and out of their depth and lack confidence in situations where they have to come up with ideas. They would, of course, have far more confidence through working through the detail of someone's ideas. So, similarly, those who like concepts, that's big picture, will lack confidence when they have to work in detail. So, some children will lack confidence in some subjects and excel in others. No one way is better, and ideally, teams at work or teams at school are made up of both types. If your child lacks confidence in one area, notice where their strengths lie and point them out. So, one of the ways that I suggest to parents that they use this in a practical sense is to notice where your child and when your child seems to feel like out of their depth or confused or overwhelmed. I had a boy the other day who, when we were going through these, he decided he was very much, I think, a big chunk person, a big picture person. And when his mother was explaining things to him, she went into a lot of detail because she felt it was like being a good mum to explain exactly how things are, and exactly what they were going to be doing. And they were going to be doing this, and they were going to be doing this, and he needed to take this and that and think about this. He just got lost along there somewhere, and just completely forgot everything she said. And she felt that he wasn't listening, but what it was is that the chunk size wasn't right. So bear in mind, what does your child prefer? Do they feel more able to cope if they know exactly what's going to happen and know all the detail? Or do they actually just want to get the general gist? You can chunk up from a small chunk by saying why that's important, what it means, etc. So, for example, if a child is feeling overwhelmed by all the detail of all their revision, the subjects they have to do, or all their homework, you can chunk up by saying what it's for. So maybe we've got mock GCSEs happening in some schools at the moment. So you chunk up to why this is important, because, they're going to be going on to A levels, they're then going to go to university, and then choose their subjects. So, that's what it's all for. It's not for actually just the GCSEs in this moment and lots of them and all this revision of all these topics. There's actually a bigger picture there. If, on the other hand, your child is feeling overwhelmed by the big picture, you can chunk down to actually, okay, so just take that picture smaller, smaller, smaller to what's the first thing I need to do? What's the first step? What's the baby step to get started? Okay. The next one is choices versus process. Some children like to have choices. They like to know what their options are and make choices. Other children prefer to just simply know they've got to do this, that, and the other. So if you have a child that's choices, and you know that they have to get out of the door by a certain time to get to school, you can't give them choices, but you can give them choices within the process. So are you going to put your shoes on first, or are you going to get your homework book, or you're going to get this or that, or, do you want me to do this or that? So you give them a choice, but they still have to do the thing that you've asked. Whilst where this is important is that a choices child, when not given a choice, can be quite stubborn and decide that their choice is going to be not to do it. And that isn't really an option if you're trying to get them to bed or trying to get them out the door, or they need to do their homework. So one of the things I used to do with my kids, my choices ones, was to say sort of, what snack would you like while you're doing your homework? And that worked really well because they could then think about what they wanted. Did they want cheese on toast? Did they want a cheese sandwich? Did they want this or that or the other? And I would scurry off and get whatever snack. And meanwhile, they're getting on with their homework, perhaps not realizing that I've given them a choice within my process, which is it's homework time. So you need to know, so a choices child will be thrown by a process instruction, which is do this and then this, and a process child would be confused when given choices. I know one boy that I was working with, it was very much an aha moment for him, because he said that he was definitely processed, and the way he knew that was that his mum every day said, what would you like for tea? And he would just like, I don't care. And then she would say, but you must have a choice. Would you like this? Would you like this? And he said, I really don't care, just anything. And she felt that he was sort of being disrespectful because she wanted to give him what she wanted, but she really didn't recognize that actually all it was, he didn't need or want a choice in that particular area. So their reactions may seem like a lack of confidence, if they're either choices and they're given process, or processes and they're given choice. They might come across as stubborn or easily overwhelmed. What's the problem? Why can't they make a choice? When actually it's simply a different way that their brain works. They're just getting frustrated because the information isn't coming to them in the way that they prefer to process. So just as your big chunk person will get overwhelmed by small chunk information, your choices person will get overwhelmed by their process. So do think, as I'm going through, what does my child prefer? Then we have towards and away from. We tend to be either towards or away from. So that is a bit more binary. Towards is when we have goals and things that we actively want to do. So we're working towards something. Away from is where we want to avoid something. So when your child is, say, slow getting dressed, or we need to leave for school or work, they might be slow because they want to carry on playing something. So that's towards. Or it could be because they don't want to go to school, which is away from. And it's important to know actually, what that is. A towards child will respond best to talking about what will be fun at school that day, maybe something they'll enjoy or a friend that they'd like to play with, because those are all towards things. An away from child needs to be reminded that if they don't hurry up, they will get into trouble at school for being late. That's away from. Their friends will be cross because they aren't there to play with them, and so on. So we need to know what language they need. Do they need to be reminded what they're working towards, or what they don't want to happen? So, for instance, with homework, a towards child would be motivated by wanting to please the teacher, or to get it done quickly so that they can play on something, or to talk to their friends, or so what they will gain by doing it and doing it quickly. An away from child needs to be reminded of what will happen if they don't do it, and that'll be something that they don't want to happen. So away from is when, avoiding situations that are stressful or awkward. So, if you do this now, the teacher won't get cross with you. So it's what they will not want. And of course, children who are anxious tend to focus a lot on what they don't want. It's quite difficult for them to think of what they do want, because the motivation is always, although motivation is probably not quite right for an away from child, but what they're trying to avoid is those things that stress them out, that they don't want. And it's actually quite useful to just say to them, well, what do you want? What are you looking forward to today? What will be great, about today? Any favourite lessons, favourite teachers? Who are you going to play with? Like, as I said. The next one is internal and external. This is about where your or center of sort of, if you like, validation comes from. A lot of teens, or children and teens, I would say, tend to get their validation externally from social media, from their peer group, from their friends, and so on. And so they really care what they think and what they say. As opposed to internal, where we actually get our validation from ourselves and to what we think. So, an example of this might be if, say, your child has done a really great sort of essay or something like that in English, and the teacher maybe doesn't think it's quite as good as they could have done, but they think it is. I've talked about feedback before. Feedback will be very important to a child who is externally referenced, but less important to one that's internally referenced. And it's quite important to know where their point of validation or reference is. Because we need to have access to both. We do need to care what other people think, but on the other hand, we also need to check in with ourselves and what we think. So if your child comes back from school saying such and such a person says I'm dumb or whatever, for you to, rather than say, oh, that's nonsense, that's not true, to say, well, what do you think? Because they do need to be able to check in with themselves. So, if you're forever praising your child and so on, you're in a sense encouraging them to look for approval outside themselves, your approval. And of course, they want to please you, but it's actually quite a good thing as they get towards secondary school to start introducing to them the idea, well, what do you think? And think about the feedback sandwich. I talked about that in another podcast, I think probably the last one. Think about, what you can say in terms of, well, what did you think went well? What do you think could have been better? Overall, what went well in that situation, with that homework, with that interaction, or whatever? What do you think? We don't want children to be completely internally referenced, because obviously they wouldn't care what other people think, and that's not what we want. But certainly being able to sort of have that flex, along that continuum. And be aware of it yourself, so that when you're talking to them, you do encourage them to be sort of able to think about their own validation, their own thoughts. Then there's match and mismatch. This is quite a challenging one, I think, partly because there seems to be less movement. It's a bit like towards and away from. There's a bit less movement along the continuum. Some children just naturally, or some people, obviously not just children, naturally want to connect, want to look for what's familiar, want to agree, want to, and what we call them is a yes and. They almost complete each other's sentences. They're almost body sort of matching each other's body language. It's all about getting on with people, agreeing, and so on. Even if they don't actually agree, it's really important to them to be seen to be matching and to agree. So we call that the matching one, and it's the yes and. Others want to disagree. They want to find what's wrong. If everybody's playing one game, they want to play another game. If everybody likes, this is their favorite character, they choose a different one. Partly because they want to be different, and also because they want to be completely honest. It's much more important to them to say exactly what they think rather than actually get on with anyone. And they are called the yes but. Now, the interesting thing about the yes but mismatch pattern is that there's a sort of link between um, those of us who are more scientifically minded tend to have a mismatch pattern. So if you think of, say, professions like sort of, I don't know, doctors, scientists, and people in that sort of world, they're looking for what's wrong. They're trying to sort of correct. So a doctor, they want to know what's wrong with you. They don't want to know what's right with you. They want to know what's wrong. A scientist will be looking for what's wrong, what's different, because they're looking for understanding, for clarity, for explanations, for that scientific thing. If you're, for instance, I find that when I'm writing, because as you know, I've written quite a few books, when I'm in my writing phase, I'm very much matching, because I'm trying to write stuff that will connect to mums and dads, and for things to resonate with them. So it's a matching. When I'm editing, I need to be in a completely different space, because there I'm looking for what's wrong, grammar or repeated sentence or missing word. I'm looking for what's wrong. I find it quite hard to write and then edit. So what I do is I'll be in writing phase, and then quite separately, in fact, I can, I'm better to even go into another room and to have like my editing hat on. So if you've got a child that tends to go, yes, but, or in a school, but miss, you said blah, 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 or if that, noticing what's wrong. If you have a child that's noticing what's wrong, they are not doing it just to be annoying or to get your attention or anything. They're doing it for clarity. They want to get really good understanding. They're likely to have quite a scientific mind. They may be, become some sort of incredibly famous and wonderful scientist one day. Of course, in the short term, though, they can struggle a bit. Sometimes with friendships where you're trying to find things you have in common with somebody. Your mismatched child is always going to find stuff that isn't common. And also when it comes to making like a move to another school, they'll find what's wrong with the school or what's different, as opposed to what's similar. So they're already on the sort of watch out for things that aren't right. So I'm hoping, there are other meta programs, and obviously any of my books go through the meta programs. I would say that Be a Happier Parent with NLP is particularly good for that. And the book I was sort of reading from, although not really, I was sort of looking at it and talking to you really, is Confidence for Kids. I've got other books. If you want a workbook that your child can go through and find out for themselves, NLP for Children covers all of that. I think probably the one for tweens and the one for teens does too. But as you probably know by now, I do offer a 30-minute free chat, which you can access via my website, which is Judy Bartkowiak, BARTKOWIAK.com. So in the services section there, if you just click book a chat with me, it'll take you to a calendar where you can just book yourself in. So please do that if there's anything about what I'm saying that you'd like to know more about, or if you want to have a chat about anything to do with your child or teen, that would be great. Okay, bye then.